Okay, so today's topic is appreciative inquiry, and I bring this up as a separate breakout because it can be applied in multiple spots throughout the strategic planning process. We're going to look at kind of where it can be applied as well as how to best practice it in strategic planning. So just to recap, wherever you're looking at this module, when we talk about appreciative inquiry, we're really looking at towards the very beginning as well as in the middle, and then in phase 3 in two particular spots we'll talk about. Particularly when a new organization is getting started, it's very useful in the input and analysis phase to be doing appreciative inquiry all over the place. An organization that exists already should definitely be doing some outreach and open-ended questions using appreciative inquiry model at the very least to stakeholders and collaborators and so on. Once an organization has kind of an idea where their phase 1 is coming to an end, they have their vision, mission, values, ends kind of in place or at least drafted out, that's another great opportunity to go get some feedback. Not that you shouldn't be talking with people as that process is going on, but if you've gotten the input, you crunch through it, and at the end you have these foundational documents and components, and you're about to start developing your plan, that's a great time to go back out and do some appreciative inquiry. Share with them where you're looking at. Share with them what you're planning. Share with them the revised vision, mission, values, ends. Have an open conversation about particularly the value, the mission and the ends, because those will really help a conversation go when they can have those tangible pieces there. And ask some open-ended questions. We'll get to what this looks like in just a few minutes, but right at the end of phase 1 and beginning of phase 2 is a great opportunity to go out to your stakeholders, to your donors, to your collaborators and say, this is what we're thinking. How can we best implement this? What is it? And I'm not saying implement as in phase 3. I'm saying plan for implementation, which is most of what phase 2 is. How would this impact you? Or what ideas do you have? And ask them for examples of things that they've seen that have worked. What has made them passionate about similar things? This is a great opportunity to do so. And phase 3 implementation, there's another opportunity towards there, particularly around strategic partnerships, where doing appreciative inquiry will help you identify areas where you can partner with other groups, collaborate, create efficiencies, and increase your effectiveness at the same time. And ongoing appreciative inquiry will help you hone your message and communications as well as fundraising and development. So it should be part of regular practice in a lot of ways, even when it's not a formal appreciative inquiry campaign or effort. The practices that are behind appreciative inquiry can be utilized very frequently in a lot of different ways to the benefit of an organization. Reminder, the process that we're going through right now, wherever you may be in it, is based on a waterfall method. There are many valid processes. This is the simplest and most straightforward approach, and because if you're taking this course, you likely don't have a facilitator, it is a straightforward way. You can't break it, as they say. The output of each phase generally serves as the input for the next. While there's some interplay between the current work and could and should be explored, it is important to substantially conclude one phase before beginning work on the next one when, again, you're using this model. And as always, when you're doing strategic planning, please be communicating to your stakeholders as well as, frankly, your staff. If you're on a strategic planning team, make sure you're communicating with the full board and so on. Just keep that in mind. What is appreciative inquiry? And if you go out on the internet and you search for this, you're going to have probably 3 or 4 main definitions out there, and you'll probably have a dozen smaller ones that have other followings. But at its core, what they should all have in common is they really allow an organization to connect with people. Its stakeholders, whatever they may be defined as, collaborators, donors, those with whom it seeks to make positive impacts, and so on. It's a form of intentional conversation. It can be done in one-to-one or a group setting. Today we're going to focus on one-to-one because essentially a group setting version of it is easier. You delete some aspects and it's just pretty straightforward. But if you can do one-to-one, you can do group, and the vice versa does not apply. It focuses on identifying opportunities in a positive frame. It focuses on getting real information from the person or people with whom you are conversing, and not steering the ship. It allows for vulnerability, openness, sharing, and a positive frame to come forward. It's a tool that can transcend the in-the-box thinking and allow for creativity, vulnerability, and open idea generation. Unlike an organization getting people together and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, what do you think? Which would then constrain the conversation around positives and negatives. It would bring in power dynamic issues. It would bring in all sorts of things. You're just open-endedly asking questions that might be relevant. And you're allowing the conversation to go wherever it needs to go. And we'll talk about how we crunch the data later, but you get a lot more insight with that approach than you would with that presumed knowledge at the beginning and pretending you know what they're going to say or know what people want. This is a fantastic tool for that. When is it applicable? Anytime an organization is looking for big picture ideas, exploring opportunities, kind of field testing priority strategies and tactics, anytime an organization needs to do some discovery of their environment through their stakeholders, either because it's a startup organization or it's an organization that hasn't done a strategic plan in a while or does not have a culture of collaboration, this helps an organization to engage with that environment, to get honest, open input about what other people see out there, what things are going to trip an organization up, what changes are happening that they might not be aware of with other organizations or entities that are in the sphere in which they're operating. Doesn't have to be a direct correlation, but there's a lot of government, private sector, public sector, other nonprofit organizations that are operating in and around the sphere every organization operates. And so by doing AI, you'll bump into these things frequently and you'll get a better read of the environment. It also helps for the discovery of stakeholders. You learn from talking with stakeholders what they're passionate about, where they see opportunities, where they see needs, either within themselves or their communities or the community in which your organization is trying to make an impact. Discovering that stakeholder input through stakeholder input, you really get an idea of where your organization needs to fill gaps, where your organization would be doing efforts that are already being handled by another organization, where there's opportunity for collaboration, and so on. It's really a powerful tool. Again, if you go in straight with, this is what we're thinking, what do you think? You miss out on a lot of that. So AI is applicable anytime you're looking to do any of these 5 things. Who is involved? And this is going to depend on the context in which AI is being used. Again, we're going to assume you're in a strategic planning process of some sort. It's going to involve staff. Staff is going to have lists of people. They're going to know who's doing what. They're going to have, from an operational standpoint, they're going to know who the players are from either competitive or collaborative environments. They're going to have a read on that from the day-to-day components. It'll involve your board of directors or your board of trustees or whatever your governing body is. They're the ones that are, frankly, morally charged with maintaining connection with your stakeholders. They're the ones that need to have an understanding of the needs, the desires, the wants, the gaps from a strategic viewpoint. When at all possible, your board of directors should be involved in any appreciative inquiry process. Subsets are fine, and it's understood, especially in organizations that have either dysfunctional boards or small, or really large boards, that maybe it's a subset that does a lot of the AI. But whenever possible, you want to get the whole board involved, especially if the entire board is going to be voting on and discerning around the strategic plan itself. Your development director and membership director I put in here because those are typically roles that need to at least be able to put flags on files. It should not be relevant. If they're an identified stakeholder, for some reason, I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be in the list, but you're going to want to understand, or have the person reaching out understand, if there is a substantial donor involved. Just make it noted on the file and make sure that they're being engaged with somebody that understands how to do AI. You don't want to go in and mess up a relationship that you're dependent upon by having mistakes made in the process. The thing we see most frequently with donors is one of the biggest mistakes is that people make promises. And that's not the purpose of AI. And people, if you approach this, will not even expect that. Yet some people get tongue-tied at some point and say, yeah, I'll get that done right away. And they're making strategic promises that they're not supposed to be doing. So make sure that the development director gets a pass at the list, and you assign people to your core donor constituency that won't break it, that won't break that conversation. I've had more than a few phone calls about issues that came about because somebody found out or didn't know that they were talking to an organization's biggest donor. It came up in the conversation, and they felt really compelled to agree with whatever they said and to commit on behalf of the organization to doing things. And that happens more often than I would like to see. So just make sure that it gets flagged ahead of time and that you make sure those assignments get handled appropriately. All right, but there are a number of common objections. It takes too much time. That comes up quite a bit. It does take time. You're asking somebody for probably 20 to 30 minutes of their time for this conversation. It probably takes 2 to 3 weeks to do a good sampling, perhaps longer if you're going to canvass your entire stakeholder base. And at the same time, there is no better way to do this. The other piece to that is that all of these conversations go into relationship building. So it's for many organizations, this process is the beginning of creating more meaningful connections between the organization and the stakeholders. So that's part of a moral obligation, one, but it's also part of building for the future in terms of getting people interested in being more engaged, getting people more financially committed to the organization, and so on. There are many long-term benefits to investing this time. Nobody will want to do this. That is a assumption that a lot of people have. I don't think I've gone through a strategic planning process that involved AI with a group where somebody didn't bring this up either in the planning process or one-to-one with me afterwards. There's always some people that, at least in the back of their mind, believe that nobody's going to want to do this. There may be hesitancy within the organization to do it, but I promise you stakeholders will want to do this. If they're able, they will. So often people only call when they want money, or they only call when they need something. You are calling to say, we value your input and we want to hear from you. Can you tell us what you think? And that places a value on someone. It makes them feel good, and most people really jump at the chance to participate. So that's actually the opposite, is what most people find. What does this have to do with? And people will bring up everything that they think they need to be doing. And they'll talk about, what does this have to do with our end-of-year campaign? What does this have to do with our membership drive? What does this have to do with this important operational thing that we do every year? What does this have to do with this program that I don't see changing at all? All of these things come up. And the fact is, it's so foundational to get this input from stakeholders that it has to do with all of those. It will instruct all of those. The only people that get hung up on this, it's typically board members Occasionally you get somebody on a finance team that wonders this, but typically you have some board members that don't want anything to change, and they will question the value of appreciative inquiry for that very reason, because it might involve adjusting or tweaking existing programs. Or it might show priorities with their stakeholders are somewhere different than what the organization currently does. Most boards and almost all board members that are going through a strategic planning process that's very intentional will understand and see the value in this. And it's just a matter of convincing and helping those who are stuck to see how it's so important to align with your collaborators and your stakeholders, align what your organization is doing with those groups. And this is a clear way to do that, and it impacts all aspects of the organization. What if they don't like what we're talking about or planning? Well, now would be the time to find it out. If you do this at least a little bit at the beginning, if you do this somewhat intentionally during the planning phase, by the time you get to the third phase of implementation and you're talking about strategic partnerships and communications and fundraising and things like that, you will have already fished out the issues. If they don't like what you're planning or talking about at the beginning or middle phases, then you need to be worried. It's fine if a few people don't, but in general, the feedback you're getting is from people that are having that meeting because they clearly care enough about the organization that they're willing to take 20 minutes of their time and share with you their thoughts in a very open-ended manner. And if everything they're sharing has nothing to do with what you're talking about or planning, then you have a problem of misalignment, and that needs to be addressed. But we'll cover that a little bit later on. But you want to be grateful that you're finding it out in the process and not afterwards. Typically, if you've got even at a reasonable level, your ear to the track, you'll be able to pick these things up earlier on in the process. But they don't get it. They'll just want this, that, the other. This has to do with accountability. If you end up at a log jam where your constituency, quote unquote, doesn't get it, and I have heard that phrase once, you need to look if it's just one person or if there's a trend. And if you're talking to 20 people and 15 of them you're saying don't get it, then that's a clear indication that the organization is totally gone. It's off the rails, that the organization doesn't get it. Keep in mind that you're talking with these people because they're your stakeholders. And if they are so disconnected from where you're going in terms of your strategic direction that there's a total impasse, that means your fundraising base is going to be going away. That means that the people you think you're supporting don't want your help. That means that your collaborators think you've lost focus and value. So perfectly normal for a few people that have supported you in the past to be like, maybe this new direction isn't for me. Wish you the best of luck, and that's fine. Especially when your change in course is being directed by the other 80% of your stakeholders. In fact, that's probably a good thing. If you spend too much time trying to appease everybody, you won't actually get anything done. But if you find out that half or even 30 to 40% of your base is dissatisfied or doesn't get what you're doing or is focusing on things that are not what is in your basket to offer at all, then you need to be concerned not with them, but with where you're going. In the case where you do have a couple of individuals in your list that were really big on one or two things that maybe you're strategically pivoting away from, thank them for their input. You're not making promises or commitments during an appreciative inquiry process. You're not saying we are going to do this or we aren't going to do this. You're literally just saying that you're exploring it, especially in the first two phases. You're looking at these ideas. If you're comfortable, you can tell them this is why we think that this might be an opportunity or this might be important to do, and so on. But don't defend things, don't question things, don't counter people, and don't agree with people or contradict people, because that shuts down that open-ended sharing part. You're just getting input right now. Make a note of what they're saying, and then when you do end up with the final version of your strategic plan, you're going to be able to reach out to those that may feel disaffected, and that would be the appropriate time to explain why you went a certain path. Some people you'll keep, some people you'll lose. That's part of growth. Won't they be upset if we listen to them, but then don't do what they want us to do? No. Like I said, there may be a handful of people that were only supporting your organization because of one thing that you did that they were passionate about, or because of one program that you had. The vast majority of people that support nonprofits support because of the overall cause. They support nonprofits because they believe in the overall direction, and they're not going to be too upset about tactical considerations or collaborative partnership efforts, or even substantial shifts. If you lose one or two, that's absolutely fine. If the rest of the work in the strategic plan was based, being grounded in your strategic direction, being grounded in your accountability to your moral owners and your overall assets and direction, don't worry about that. Can't we just send a survey? No. That loses all the subtext, all the context, all the follow-up information. The survey, and this is the biggest one probably on this list, the survey method assumes you know everything. And I'm going to back that up and say it again. The survey method assumes you know everything, because if you're asking only those questions, that means that you have developed the frame, you have developed the options within the frame, and you're asking everybody to fit their experience, their knowledge, their concerns, their passions, what they're seeing on the ground, etc., into those questions with those possible responses. And that might work if you did an AI maybe just a few months ago, and you're just following up for some input on where your process is taking you since then, and you want to get people's like, hey, is this about what everybody was saying? But as part of AI itself, and getting that initial broad-based input, that is a toxic way to do it, and it won't yield results. It will basically yield an affirmative to whatever you're doing, because the people that are going to respond to you are the people that like things the way they are right now. They're not going to be looking for change. They're not going to oppose anything. People that are either maybe a little dispassionate or kind of half and half, they're not going to bother responding to a survey. And those that are upset, or even those that may support you but think you could do better in certain realms, they're not going to share any of that information in a survey, and most of them won't bother responding. The only people that are going to respond to the surveys are, by and large, the people that like everything the way it is and don't really care about the changing environmental factors in your operational environment, or what might be needed for the stakeholders as a whole. So keep those things in mind. The process. It's a fairly straightforward process. I put a lot of text in here, but it is a fairly straightforward process. You generate your call list of stakeholders. That's going to be different for everybody. You reach out and schedule a time. This is not a 5-minute conversation, so you need to reach out ahead of time. It's polite. You explain in your outreach why you're reaching out, how much time you're requesting, and you thank them for considering your request. At the meeting, you reiterate why you're there. You ask questions and then listen. You ask follow-up questions frequently, and you take copious notes. Very copious notes, after you ask permission, of course. And then you end on time and you thank them again. That's it. That's all it's about. You might have a few starter questions, and then you let the conversation take it where it goes. Typically, for most clients we have 2 to 3 questions that are scripted. Everything else in the conversation is based on whatever they say. You can have a few more, just try not to load it down. If you load a 20-minute conversation down with 6 questions, you won't be able to do any follow-ups, and it will feel way too scripted. What's worse is you won't be able to get the really beautiful follow-up stuff and the depth that you want to get in an AI interview. After the meeting, thank them again via card, letter, email, something. I had one person who texted everybody that they interviewed the day afterwards just to thank them. I guess that's a new thing, but that's fine. Just acknowledge that they invested some time with you. And then you execute your follow-up items, which we'll talk about shortly. The only difference with this process, which is a one-to-one process, and doing it in a group setting, is in this process you do this reach out and schedule a time, whereas in a group setting you're scheduling something and you're inviting everyone. And at the meeting is a group meeting as opposed to an individual meeting. You still reiterate why you're there, you still ask questions, and you still listen a lot. What you'll probably end up doing to do a group setting of this would be pair people up and you have them ask the questions to each other, and then you get back in the big group and you have people share what they learned. And you'll see synergies coming out. I love doing this in a group setting because you'll see some people raising the same thing multiple times. You can also, after everybody shares, you can also say, did anybody else have a similar experience? And they raise their hand. Or there's a fist to 5. Fist is 0. It means I don't relate to that at all. Then 5 is I totally relate to that and I wholeheartedly agree. And then 3 is kind of somewhere in the middle. So rather than saying, do you agree or disagree, what you generally say is, who here can relate to that? And you teach them the fist to 5, and then you can just quickly glance around a room and see kind of about, okay, that's a lot of fingers up or a lot of fists, and you get some sort of idea. Try to avoid the positive, again, try to avoid the language of agreeing and disagreeing because it makes people feel judged. But if you ask who can relate to that, that's a positive framework, and it allows you to see who in the, how many people in the room feel the same way, so to speak. And that's really the only difference is you're knocking out a lot of conversations at one time. You pair people up or maybe do groups of 2 or 3 to talk about the questions, and they discuss them and then they share it as a group. So you can get through 100 people and it does take a little longer because you have the setup and you have the sharing time and everything. But generally in 60 minutes or so, you can get through a group of about 100 people. Well, has been my experience at least. Sample language. Hi, Peggy. This is just a random example. Healthy Communities Foundation is working on developing a strategic plan to guide us in the coming years as we adapt to the changing environment in which we operate. As part of that process, we are reaching out to some of our longtime supporters to get input on some key aspects of our future. See how open-ended that is? I'm not setting the stage for anything. I'm not skewing them for one program or against another program. I'm not mentioning things that we've been doing to try and steer the conversation. I'm just very open-ended saying key aspects of our future. I'd really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you. If you have time in the next couple of weeks, I would be happy to meet for coffee if you're available. If not, a phone call would suffice. I know your time is valuable, and I promise it won't take more than insert a time there. Please let me know if you're able to fit me in your schedule. We're being respectful. We're acknowledging that this is an investment of their time. We're saying exactly how long we are going to take. 20 minutes is more than a 5-minute phone call. So you need to make sure that you're making it clear that you're asking for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever you think you need. That's the scheduling call. That's all there is to it. Take this language, do with it what you will, but that's pretty much what you're looking for. When you open the conversation, it's the same basic thing. Hi, thanks again for meeting with me and for taking time out of your schedule. As I mentioned, insert the language for why you're undertaking it. And then you just start asking a question. Can you tell me what is it that's going on in your life that is most applicable to the work we're doing? Or what is it you value most about what we're doing? Or in your work with, insert the name of a collaborative partner, what is it that you see your organization, if it's a partner organization, undertaking in the next couple of years that we need to be aware of, or something like that? Whatever your opening question is, make it so that they can answer it, and then you just build the conversation from there. Tips for success. Listen twice as much as you talk. This is hard for most people. Even when we can get to 50-50, there's still a tendency to want to respond by validating what they're saying or arguing with what they're saying. Being able to get to the point where they're comfortable talking means that they can't feel judged. Even if you're agreeing with them, you're making them think too much about filtering what they say. If you say, yeah, I totally agree, they then know that you're judging what they're saying. So be very careful, keep listening, and say, wow, that's interesting. Not in a condescending way, just open-ended. You can say it in an exciting way, but try not to be judging either for or against what they're saying as they're sharing it. Ask permission to take notes and then take them. I have made this mistake more than a few times. I've said, do you mind if I take notes? I really want to make sure that I capture everything you're saying. That's the line I generally use. Everybody has always said yes. Nobody said no. They actually seem to, increases the value of what they're saying. And they view that as affirmation of the value of what they're talking about. And then I'll get caught up in what they're saying and I'll totally forget to take notes. So be careful. Don't make the mistake I make. Ask permission to take notes and then take them. Ask follow-up questions as often as appropriate. Drop the script as much as possible. If you have a framework script to work off of because you need to, because you're not experienced in this, perhaps it's the first or second time you're doing it, fine. Use that as a framework to get you going and to close it out. But in the conversation, as they're answering the question, be thinking about, as you're taking notes, what follow-up questions would be appropriate. If they're bringing up something, if you have a question such as what organization in the field of homelessness, in the field of environmental action, in the field of poverty reduction, whatever your organization happens to be working on, what other organizations are you working with? Just to get an idea of what the environment might be be like around you. And if they mention some, it would be totally appropriate to say, why are you passionate with that organization? What are they doing that you are most passionate about? And then you'll know both what other organizations in your realm are doing, and you'll know what your stakeholder is most passionate about. And that's without asking anything about your organization. You'll know what is being covered elsewhere, you'll know what makes them passionate, and you might be able to find either a collaboration opportunity with that other organization or something within your organization that might appeal to this stakeholder. But you'll also, as you do this with more and more people, you'll see what other people respond in those questions, and you'll be able to put together kind of a culmination of where there's a lot of responses that are similar and so on. So you lose a lot of these things without asking those follow-up questions. Get those follow-up questions going. Make them part of the conversation. Doing so also helps you divorce yourself from the script, and it allows you to focus more on listening than talking. At the end, thank them again. Thank them again. And then do the follow-ups as we'll discuss shortly. There are 3 categories of follow-ups, and we're going to talk about each of these individually. One is the data analysis and strategic filtering. The second piece is individual follow-ups based on the conversation. The third piece is your operational to-dos based on the conversation. Again, we avoid making promises on things, but let's take these from the bottom to the top. We don't promise that we're going to do things based on what they share with us. But if they share with us something that they're passionate about, that their community is working on, that another organization is working on, that is in line with something you're currently doing operationally, that's not in your strategic plan, that's actually happening right now, pass that information along to the appropriate staff member to do the follow-up and connect those dots. Don't say, hey, I'm going to make this happen, or I'm going to do this for you. Definitely take a moment, make a note in your paper, and then really quickly turn it around and connect those groups. Connect if there's something that another organization was doing that's right in line with what you're doing, make sure that they're talking. If your person, I'm really passionate about this, but I just don't have any, I don't have any way to do this, that, or the other, and your organization has a way to do that, don't tell them there in the moment, because again, they're going to feel judged, or they're going to feel like you're working on it too much from an operational standpoint and not listening to them. But it wouldn't be bad for them to get a call in a day or two saying, hey, so-and-so told me that you were interested in this. We actually have these materials, etc. And then do that follow-up. You want to keep them open and not feeling judged and vulnerable and everything while the conversation is going on. But certainly when the conversation is open, follow up if there's operational things you need to get plugged in based on what they say, or individual things that they've expressed a need for, and you have those, definitely make those happen. And I strongly recommend doing those within a week of your conversation. When the entire piece is over, you need to be doing data analysis and strategic filtering, and let's define that. You need to capture all the information within a day. After an interview, your mind begins to go to mush pretty quickly. So there needs to be an effort after each conversation happens that whoever's doing the interview transcribes their notes in a form that is useful. Some people have Google Forms they set up, or Zoho Forms or something to capture the data in a spreadsheet format. Others just type them out. I had a conversation with so-and-so. This is what happened, blah, 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 and they type it in a memo format. You will forget the nuances of the conversation within a day if you don't type it out in some format. So make sure the data is captured right away. At the end of the process, collect all the data and have a few people. 3 to 5 people is generally a good number. I have seen a large organization that did multiple sessions across the United States over the course of a number of months, and they had a few thousand data points. They were able to convene a team of 30 people to go through, filter it, and through an iterative process where you did chunks at a time, and they broke into subgroups and took chunks, but they had thousands of data points to go through. If you don't have thousands of data points, if your data points are 100 or less, or even up to about 200, a team of 3 to 5 will suffice. If you're at the 250 mark, it might take a month, but a group of 3 to 5 should be able to get this done. And you want to go through and see where you're seeing commonalities, where you see trend lines, not where you see 1 or 2 people agree, but where you see 10% or more going in a direction. There might be something to look at. If you see half of the people responding in similar ways, that's definitely something to look at. If you're asking people what other organizations they are working with, and 6 people all say the same one, I don't care if you have 100 people, that's 6%, and they're all working with the same one, and you might have a couple out there that didn't think of it that day. That's a flag that you need to see what's going on over there, either because they're a competitor or a collaborator, but you need to know who they are and what they're doing. If multiple people say that their group, their community, their neighborhood block, their community or something is working on some project that you're not in touch with at all but is related to your field, you need to make sure that your strategy is reflecting the needs of your stakeholders. That's just a community-based organization model, but you can see how that would apply to a faith community, that could apply to an advocacy group, that could apply to anything. If you have a subset of your constituency where they're all focusing on something without talking to each other, and your organization is totally missing it and doesn't have a strategic leg even planted on that, you need to adjust your planning process or adjust some of the things going into your planning process to make sure that you're meeting that need. So you're doing your filtering, you're seeing where there's trends, where there's a few, where there's a reasonable clump of people that are fishing a certain direction. Also look for things where people are opposed or averse to a certain direction. These are worth lifting up as you do this filtering. You're not looking for every little piece of information. You're looking for the themes that are coming out. You're looking for some commonality. You're looking for what you can lift out. This is also a place that can get corrupted unintentionally. There is a tendency among existing organizations to deify the past. And there's nothing wrong with keeping programs, building programs. In fact, every organization that's strong that I know of at least has 1 or 2 flagship programs that are kind of their core. What can happen, however, is that through the filtering and the strategic, and the data analysis and strategic filtering, people can look towards these pet projects and try to steer everything as if it supports what their end project is. We find a lot of this, if you're doing appreciative inquiry right around a budget formation time, this happens a lot. I have had multiple occasions where I paused an appreciative inquiry session until after they finished their budgeting process to remove that influence. Because everything was getting skewed as if, oh, well, this will fix that, or this will fix that. And it was not taking an honest assessment of what the data was saying. So be sure to make sure that in your 3 to 5, group of 3 to 5, you're having people that are involved in or care about different aspects of the organization, and you can kind of reduce the amount of influence that skew can have. Also make sure you don't have people that have pet peeves or things that they really hate on that. You really want the people on this team to be even-keeled, level-headed, open-minded. That's where these people need to be. That's your data analysis and strategic filtering team. When you come out of that group is going to then make recommendations, not really recommendations, but an assessment made available to the board. They're going to say, these are the things that we found. We found a lot of people responded this way. A lot of people didn't think this. And you just kind of go through some of the nuance. You do some anecdotal information just to help explain the overall themes. There will be a lot of fantastic data for individual follow-up that is utilized, and a lot of data that isn't. A lot of data is just, you get it all in case it happens to match one of these strategic filters that you have a threshold on. And there's going to be a lot of input that just doesn't. It was one person out of 100, and that group that does the data analysis is going to have to see, okay, well, this is kind of connected to that, it's kind of connected to that, so let's lift that up. Or these 8 people all said this thing, and that gets lifted up. These 6 people really opposed that, maybe that gets lifted up. But the one-offs you let low, you let them go. Otherwise, you're going to be spending forever trying to make something out of one person saying something. And that is not a strategic approach. So this is something that can be challenging for groups that don't have experience in doing this kind of work. But it's very valuable to make sure you have the right people in it, that they can do that assessment, that they can trudge through the data and piecemeal it together what it's actually telling them and turn data into information. Okay. It doesn't stop here. Appreciative inquiry really is part of relationship-based organizational development. If for advocacy groups, it's called relationship-based organizing. For development teams, it's called relationship-based development or relationship-based fundraising. It comes down to an organization's commitment to be in relationships with its stakeholders. In doing this work with small businesses, this can be a hard sell and people don't see the value. Nonprofits almost always understand why that's a moral calling and a moral need. Having those relationships is critical. But AI should be the start of those things if you don't already have them in place. Appreciative inquiry can be a great launching step in getting to the point where you have ongoing, meaningful relationships with your stakeholders. If you do it only once every 5 years, you're not going to be able to benefit from that. But if you stay in touch, either through written or phone calls or individual writing phone calls or getting together for one-to-ones over the course of a year, doing it every couple of months, you will begin to see an increase in the number of people you have involved, an increase in the depth of their involvement, an increase in your financial gain from those relationships, and it can create a lot of benefits for an organization. It is really grounded in that ethical, relationship-focused manner of building towards common goals. Be careful when you are speaking with people, not to promise something that will come out of these conversations. Make sure that they understand that you're valuing their input, which is kind of the language we've been using for this entire session. Don't don't try to promise things as part of this, because you will actually harm a relationship if you promise things as you're going through the process. And if you keep it in a focus on relationship building, if you keep the focus on appreciating and valuing what they're sharing with you, and you keep the focus on that positive outcome and positive opportunity, which is ingrained in all that is appreciative inquiry, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And it can be a great tool that can launch a lot of relationships and deepen the value of the organization in a lot of people's eyes. So with that, that's kind of a primer on what appreciative inquiry is. There are plenty of resources out there, but I definitely wanted to encourage you to look at this as a tool that you can use as you're doing strategic planning.